Thank you for my introduction and for having me here. I'm really excited to be in New Brunswick. It's a place I haven't been before, so it's always nice to be in new places and meet new people. As you mentioned, I grew up in Wales, and there's a long history of craft traditions in Wales. My grandparents, my parents, my aunts all made textile works, knitted, crocheted, and I totally didn't want anything to do with it. And I was going to be a painter until I got to my MFA, and then I realized that all of my work would be much better served by actually using the things that I was interested in, the materials that I was talking about and how they were related to place. So I have a bit of a split practice. I make textile works that are sort of draw upon histories of painting and drawing practices, color composition, texture, line drawing, and I sort of build on those, and sometimes I combine painting in with my textiles. Sometimes I create my own textiles and then paint upon them. And then I have this separate string practice that appeared one day in my life and has since taken over on the side. And it's all to do with temporary work, with not having an object come out of it. When there is an object, it's something that sort of documents more of an action. And so this piece on the left here is from a trip I did on a canoe trip that I'll be talking about later. So, what is a string figure? I can actually make that one. I'm really proud. It took me a long time. String figures are geometric shapes created on the hands from a loop of string, and they are found in cultures all around the world, which was what was really exciting to me, but they're also found in Canada in the Indigenous communities, especially in the north and on Vancouver Island. So this relationship to place comes out in them a lot, in the materials that the string was made of, in the titles that they're given, in this sort of community action that goes on between people as they sort of compete or compare or just communally work with string. And so I got really excited when I found out about them. One of the things when I heard about Handmade Assembly was this description, and I'm going to quote your thing. It says, "A response to the significant number of artists who have in recent years been using materials and processes that are laborious, often intimate, and usually associated with traditional craft methods." And while my textile practice would definitely automatically fit in that, I thought it would be more interesting to talk about the string work because it is a methodology that is definitely related to craft, but there's no object that comes out of the end of it. So this hand making doesn't necessarily have to be something with a made object. And so that's what I'm going to be talking to you about today. One of the things that really got me excited about looking at string figures was a video I watched by Donna Haraway. She was giving a talk at a university, and she was combining these sort of disparate areas of science fiction with string figures, storytelling with relations between humans and animals, and it was just a really exciting talk, really complicated, and it took me a while to get through it, but I really enjoyed it. And one of the quotes that came out of there was about Navajo string games. So Navajo string games are played mainly in winter, Spider Woman's storytelling season. These string figures are thinking, as well as making practices, pedagogical practices, and cosmological performances. Some Navajo thinkers described string figures as one kind of patterning for restoring harmony, beauty, and right relations of the world, including right relations of humans and non-humans. So those are her words, and she's obviously been researching the work of string figures in the United States. But for myself, working with place and storytelling, I got really excited by this idea of string, of just a loop of string being able to tell stories and being able to relate us to place in some way. And that there are ways of making that can collapse and can be failures and then come together and fall apart, and that's a different way of experiencing the world, of embracing those things that aren't whole and aren't permanent and are more flexible and a little bit dodgy to think about. And then the other thing that simultaneously came across my email was an invite to an exhibition by, well, not by this guy, but by a group who were looking at Harry Smith's collection of string games from the 1960s. So Harry Smith was a collector, he was a folklorist, he collected music from the US, he was a filmmaker, he was a bit of a quirky character, and he collected this huge source of string games from all over the world, and also paper airplanes. I mean, you know, there's as many combinations of folding paper, I guess, as of messing with string. And he gave them all to the Getty Research Institute, or it was donated when he passed away, and they made this exhibition. And so this came to my email, the picture of him holding that, and then below it, it wasn't exactly that image, but it was a similar one. And I was just struck by this combination of string as a drawing that had been pinned to a board, and it looked like a painting or a drawing that we would see in a contemporary art gallery now. And also this idea of taking something that was really bodily, and then what happens when you make it still, and what happens when you pin it down, and what does it lose and what does it gain from this sort of collecting of something that was really organic to the body. And so these were how they were displayed in the exhibition. So something really like enticing about them, but there's something lost in that disconnect from your body. And then put into these like encasements that was really sort of limiting of your experience of them. And so I started digging. And that's part of what I like to do, is dig around. I take something that, even with my textile practice, I like to take something that I don't really know much about and start digging into it and try and learn and allow myself to show mistakes as well as successes. And sometimes that can be a very vulnerable place to be, but it also allows for really interesting, say with stitch work, really interesting lines that come across from your machine jamming up and things going wrong. With crochet, I quite often end up with holes in things, and I get people who do it professionally coming up to me going, "What did you do?" Like, what is this? And it's like, but I'm using it from a different place. I'm using it as an artist. I'm not a professional crafter. I'm a visual artist with an interest in sort of what happens when you use materials. So this one got me quite excited. I love this image. It's sort of this combination of netting, but it could also be a ladder that was in one of the books that I was researching from, and also the way that the hands are put into the frame in the photograph. And then I was also looking at sort of learning practices, the way that string is used in community, in teaching, has been used in the past as a means to think about connectivity, especially in the 1960s and 70s. So there were some really funny images of these sort of actions happening, art actions, learning actions, people playing in learning. And on top of that, this is my grandfather. And when he passed away in the 90s, and I didn't know him very well, but when he passed away, one of the things that I remember my aunts and my parents talking about was how they had buried him with a collection of objects in his pocket that he'd been carrying around with him since World War II. And they were a length of string measured to a meter, a pencil that was sharpened down to a little stump, a couple of pound coins, because that was all my grandmother would allow him. He was given them, you know, every few days. That was what his pocket money was. And an elastic band and a plumb weight to make sure everything was straight. And with those things, he would build in his garden, he'd build walls, he'd make the chicken coops, like, because everything, the length of string was his measurement, and it sort of contained this information for him. And that's what he'd been carrying with him. And he was sort of a handyman type. So while the females in my family were making a lot of things, also the men in my family were. He would make little matchstick caravans. So he'd like meticulously glue together little matchsticks until he made a caravan or a car. It was really weird. And my grandfather on the other side used to make shell dolls. So he would collect shells off the beach and then make these doll figures of Welsh women in traditional costume out of shells. So that he stuck in the back of my mind with all of this string work as this way of sort of being able to make with very few materials. And so the first project that I decided to work on for this was called A Mountain to Nothing. And I wasn't really sure where I was going with it. I had gone through my grad program, and I had all of these works with maps that I could wear. So they were textiles. I would draw out maps and sew them together and then put them on and sort of do a little performance, take photographs, make drawings, put them back on the wall. So they sort of went back and forth between 3 dimensions and 2 dimensions. And then these string figures were just sitting in the back of my head. And I'd come across one that was this mountain form. And it had several different names depending on where it was from. So in Hawaii, it was considered a volcano. And in another place, it was considered an island. And more locally, a similar one was considered a mountain. And so I loved that. That got me really excited because it's like different places all around the world, people playing with this string loop and giving them different names for the similar form that comes out based on their own geography and their own personal experiences, their life experiences. So I started trying to make it from instructions on the internet, which is really difficult. And I finally sort of got it. And then I had to figure out how to document. And so that took a while too, until I got this sort of black form in the background, the hands in the frame, trying to do this myself, like set up with a tripod, and it was a nightmare. And so then, you know, because it was such a nightmare, I decided to do it 10 more times. So each time I made one, I took a photograph, and each time it came up different because my own body and the tension of the string and the atmosphere on that string, how the moisture in the air, whether the knot in the string was around my thumb when I started or around my finger when it started, would change how this shape ended up, how the posturing of my hands, everything changed the same actions. So I ended up with a series of 10. And I'm not much of a photographer, so the lighting's all different. But what was important for me was this act of making something that I didn't need to have anything at the end. Like after you've made it, you just have to let it go. Yeah, every time you have to let it go. And it was a really invigorating moment for me to be okay with letting go of something I made. That I didn't need to be precious about it. I didn't need to think about framing. I didn't need to think about how it was going to be displayed on a wall. There was no relationship to the gallery. It was just me in my studio working on repeating actions that had a similarity to working with crochet and working with textiles, because there's this repetition and there's this ritual of repeating things, but that then they disappear. So each time, yeah, the knot ends up in a different place, the fingers end up in a different place. Sometimes they're more geometric than others. And at this point, I hadn't really talked to anyone about it. And so I didn't realize how many forums I could access and how many people I could talk to about it. And in some ways, I really enjoyed that. I enjoyed having to figure it out by myself. And so coming from this work, I decided to approach a gallery in Victoria called Open Space. They're an artist-run center. They do a lot of really experimental work. They will put on, residencies and probably very much like Struts, actually, in their approach to things. They do a lot of music programming, too, so they have music series and open word nights. And they were interested in books and how they could pull out their own book collection and have someone making work that revolved around books. So I started talking to someone who worked for them, and we decided that we would do a residency. And so I was given a space, and when we talked about it, it was like going to be a little cubby in the corner, and I was just going to work away, and people would come in, and I'd have a chit-chat. And then I got there, and they're like, hey, we've got half the gallery for you. You're going to be sitting here in the next 2 months, right in the center of everything, right next to a big video installation. I was like, oh my gosh, I have to be a performer now. So this was my setup. I had sort of an L-shaped table. They brought out their book collection. We had a couch that was just the other side of the book collection there, so people could come in and enjoy what was going on. As I said, on this side, there was a video installation by another artist. And then I started just working on it. So the spine project was an artist book. I actually have it here. I told them it was going to be a limited edition. It was all going to be handmade. And it was going to be a total experiment. And I was very lucky that they were willing to go along with it, because I wasn't sure whether it was actually going to work. There was no guarantee that there was going to be a product at the end. And so I was documenting my failures as well as my successes in trying to learn string figures from a book rather than from a community, which is how they have always existed before now. So, what shall I talk about next? So this was in full view of visitors, and I will show you some of the... So this was a failure, in case you didn't guess. And so each day I would come into the space. I had this book. I would look through it. I would decide on a piece that I was going to try and make. And every time it fell off my hands or it slipped, I would put it on a board and I would take a photograph of it. And there were a lot of failures, because there's a whole language around making these things that you have to learn if you're trying to learn it from a book rather than a human being. I did have some successes, and for those, I decided that I would pin it down like a specimen. So drawing upon those Harry Smith drawings, but also just drawing upon this sort of dark ethnography of putting down someone else's work from another culture on a board, pinning it down, or putting an animal specimen or a plant specimen down on a board and flattening it out and taking away all humanity from it. And so that's how I recorded my successes. This is the book I was working from, and I owe a lot to this book. and to the people at the Alert Bay Umista Cultural Center, who gave me sort of permission to do this, and as much as you need permission, but I wanted to ask them if it was okay, and also connections to other people to talk to about it, because I really wanted, even though they exist in cultures all around the world, I was on Vancouver Island, and that place was where I was drawing from, and so I wanted to look at the work that was made on that island. And one of the biggest collections of string figures is actually from Alert Bay, and was collected in this book. Julia Averkieva was a Russian ethnologist in the early 1900s, and she went to Alert Bay and recorded all of these things, and it's very academic in the way that it was collected. And then her documentation got lost. It disappeared. It ended up in New York and disappeared from all view for about 50 years until it appeared in a box in someone's cupboard. And so Mark Sherman, who's a string figure enthusiast and sort of put together the book, he's also a biologist. He put together this book with UBC Press, and with also Bill Holmes from the Pacific Northwest Society. So this book was my major source. It can, I guess I'll go back to them. So it contains these images, like very small images, and then descriptions. So each of your fingers is given a name. Whether it's towards you or far away is given a term. Whether it's at the top of your finger or at the bottom of your finger is given a term. And before you can learn these things, when you're trying to learn from a book, you have to sort of give your body terms. And that was really an interesting process. And it also meant that there were a lot of mistakes, because you're just sort of trying to figure out how this fits into text, and it basically doesn't. So I kept notes. Every day I made my own notebook. I'm actually using it here. And every day I wrote down my research, I wrote down how things were going, I made little drawings, I made notes when I was paying attention to videos, I made notes of pretty much anything, people who came into the gallery. I made notes of our conversations about what I was doing, what they remember about string games. A lot of people came from all over the world, because that's what Victoria's like. There's people from all over the place popping in. And each time someone said to me, "Oh, I remember doing those. I thought they were only from my country." And then they would proceed to show me something they did when they were 6 years old and intimidate me, because I didn't actually know what I was doing, and that was part of my excitement, but for them it was like, oh, okay, you're not going to show us something? So yeah, I kept this notebook, and I documented the notebook and put it online afterwards, so that anyone in the future can access my notes on what was going on. So each page is actually on a blog. Eventually I came to decide that I wanted to use the same black background as I had seen in previous works. So this is one of the images that's in the book. It's obviously one that didn't work out. I came really excited by the ones that didn't work out, because they're just like little line drawings, and I love drawing, but they're line drawings that I had no control over. You know, it was just sort of like, oh, it didn't work, it's on a board, take a photograph. Pick it back up again, try again. And then this is one of the successes. So as I said, they each have names. They each have terms to describe how you are putting them together. And these things were contained into this book that gave nothing of the people that were behind them. And then I was working with books as well, so it was like, how do I deal with this sort of problem with the book? This is a piece called A Canoe Maker Looks at His Road from the Hill, which was obviously, relates to Vancouver Island and to the people who were living there. It's a very simple one, so you can flip it back and forth, and it tells a story. And I can play later if people want to see. And so I had friends come in, and they would talk, and they would document things as I was going. And then we had an open evening night, which was really exciting because it changed my practice almost. I hadn't really been working with people all that much, with communities, and both my textile practice and my string practice has now become this constant game of finding people who will play. And so this was a video night for the other artist. We had swing dancing, and we also had string games. I was surprised. There were a lot of young people who came out and knew how to play. I wasn't quite sure how it was going to go. You never know when you haven't brought that up with the community yet, like what knowledge is there, and it was really quite rich, and how many people who were younger than me actually knew how to play them. So we had a lot of fun that evening, sort of teaching each other too, and it sort of really brought into focus that the book was a different experience than the community. It's me playing. But then I had to really get down to the book. So I started making mock-ups with cardboard, and I wanted to be able to take the book, which is a container, a vessel for information, but it's also something that gives ownership to whoever holds it of that information. It's sort of a possession thing. It gives control over who it's passed on to, and to break that a little bit. So I wanted to take the spine of a book and break it and make it into a string figure so that every time you opened the book, it would collapse. And when you closed the book up and closed the text away from you, the string figure would form. So you had this flip-flop back and forth between success and failure, forming with materials rather than forming with words. And this is what I ended up with. So this is the book. I designed the fabric. This is the sort of the mock-up one. I designed the fabric on spoon flower. I love spoon flower. Does anyone know what it is? It's amazing. You can go on there, you can throw your photographs, your drawings, anything you want. You can rotate them, you can mirror them, you can make them into all sorts of designs, and then you decide what fabric you want it printed on, and you press a button, and they mail it to you. It's great. Don't have to figure out all the technical stuff. So I took one of my images, repeated it, played around with it a little bit on the computer, and sort of made the fabric cover for the book. And then I took the images and I had them printed onto a long sheet. So this is, it's an accordion style book. It's all printed onto a really long sheet and then individually folded. And each page has a memory. I took a memory of my grandmother rolling wool. And she would take a sweater or something she'd already made. She would unravel it in front of us, take this thing apart, hand us the string, the wool, and make us ball it. And then she would remake something else out of it. And I think part of this interest has come out of that. It's like the thing was never ending. She didn't like the sweater, she didn't like the hat, it got unraveled, something new went in, or she just got bored and she didn't have any wool, something around the house would get unraveled, remade into something else, and then possibly unraveled again. So it's this continuous use of string going through time. So every time the things had collapsed and I'd taken a photograph, I used the words that I'd written and I jumbled them up so that you couldn't quite get a grasp of what was happening. So it was like a struggle to get back that memory in some way. When you can't quite fix things in time and your words get jumbled, your memories get jumbled, things go in different orders. And then when things did come together, I added the text as I wanted it to be read. So each twist of the wrist eating away, each rotation shifting shape. Was this sort of action of balling this wool. And so the pages flip back and forth between unraveling and coming together. And the choice of the images that I was using was from a series that was called Wrinkled Forehead in the book, which unravels and comes back together into different forms itself. So there was this sort of storytelling in the original string figure. So that's the accordion. And so the book becomes this really flexible thing that can move back and forth, like it's not fixed. Anyway. And the only way to access the string figure is to turn the text away from yourself. So in order to read, you have to close it, you have to collapse it, and then you have access to the text. But in order to sort of have the experience of this form coming out, you have to turn text away from yourself and ignore that sort of part. And then there was an edition of 12, wrapped them up. There's 2 artist proofs. A couple were given to the open space. One was given to Flask Publishing, who was funding part of the project. And one was given to the UMISTA Cultural Center up in Alert Bay. And so everything that I worked on, everything, the notes from people who came in to talk to me, the pictures I took while I was there, the pictures from the opening night, anything that I had at the end all went onto this blog. So it exists as this just digital documentation of a moment in time working with these string games. So I came to the end of that project and I got the opportunity to go on a canoe trip. And I wasn't sure what to do with that as far as being an artist. It's like, going on a canoe trip, what do you do? So it was called Channel Surf, the actual canoe trip. It's put together by a group of artists called Department of Biological Flow, who I 100% recommend looking at. They are amazing. They've just started a new project called Murma Land Studios, where they're inviting artists and academics to go and camp out with them in different places around the country. There's a price, but they're well worth it. You eat together, you sleep together, you know, have fun, you make art, you have conversations. It's a combination of philosophers, outdoor enthusiasts, artists, just anyone who's interested and can sort of tap into the theme that goes along with the trip. So this one was Channel Surf. They were interested in us being data packets. So we were each bringing our information with us. We would transfer in and out. It was a 12-day canoe trip. You could come for 2 days, for 6 days, for 12 days. And so everyone was in at different times. The group changed throughout. So you always had different information coming in, different group dynamics coming in. And I came to it with a small grant from the BC Arts Council to do a project called Passing Through. Which again, you know, I was thinking about place. This was along the Rideau Canal. So it goes into Ottawa. We were going from Kingston to Ottawa. And this sort of intersection of 2 waterways, how you could pass through, what happens when you pass through a new place, what happens to information when we sort of just briefly meet with each other. And so this was the group. This is the end. We look a little bit bedraggled. We carried everything with us. So this was part of their planning. This wasn't my planning. We had a solar oven that we cooked all sorts of things, like we put lentils and beans and things in it and cooked them throughout the day by sitting it on the top of the canoe. Each of those big buckets had just tons of food. There was a herb garden that we carried with us, all of our camping gear. There were about 12 canoes. So each day we'd have to pack up our tent, load everything into the canoes, make sure they were well balanced, all get in, paddle, sometimes for 8 hours. I think we only had one day that was 4 hours, and that was the best day ever. Every other day, a lot of it was work. You were like laboring through getting to communally get from A to B. Some people are better at paddling than others, some people are better at navigating than others, so it was like this game of figuring out how you were going to do it. We'd have little meetings at lunchtime and, little transfers of art projects, and then in the evening we'd cook together and do our whatever we'd brought with us. So knowing that I was going, I was going for 6 days. That's all I could get off. I was teaching at the time. So we joined them in the middle of the trip and went into Ottawa. And knowing I was going, it was like, what can I take with me as a textile artist primarily that is not going to get damaged in the rain, that is not going to weigh a lot, and can still make an impactful piece of art that I can say to the BC Arts Council, hey, I made something. I did something. And in the end, I didn't know about the impactful part. I don't think that's important, but we had some beautiful days too. And this is us sort of camping out in our little cocoons there. So I decided that I would take a piece of string, a pencil, an elastic band, and a camera. That was it. And so drawing upon my granddad's sort of things that he kept in his pocket, that's what I chose to take with me. And that I was going to make drawings. So I was going to allow the water, since the water was pulling us or we were fighting against it in our daily actions, that every evening I would record the water and record my actions in the water through casting this piece of string into whatever body was nearby and seeing what happened and documenting it. So the pencil acted like a buoy and kept, for the most part, unless it was really running water, kept the string above the water so I could see it. And I ended up with these just like string lines. Some of them were more interesting than others. Some of them were really hard to document. And every evening, that was just what I did. So I would take half an hour and go to somewhere and cast it into the water. Now, if anyone knows the Rideau Canal, there's a lot of people around. It's a good dog walking area. There's little parks. So quite often I would find myself standing on the side of a dock or a little edge, and there'd be a fisherman right next to me casting out for bass, and there'd be a woman like throwing a stick for the dog, and me throwing pencil. And got some good funny looks there. But it got me really excited because it was about doing an action without an expectation of what people would take away from it. And I think that's really hard as an artist, to not overthink what other people are going to get out. And this sort of just forced me into a situation where I had to do that, where I just had to do it and see what happened. Sometimes people would talk to me, sometimes they wouldn't, but I like to think that at least they had a shift in their day, that it was something unusual. And so I came up with this group of images. They exist only digitally. So there's no There's no money involved, there's no object involved. It was just this art action and a documentation that people can access and a conversation that can be had. This one, the elastic band made it bob almost horizontally. So these ones were part of a series that I called In Motion because the water was obviously moving. And then these were At Rest. They each described sort of a state while we were there. Some murky mud there. I got my feet really gross. And then these ones were residual impressions. So at some point on the canal, this sort of foam had built up. You go through all of these locks and the water comes down and goes up and it sort of creates this residue plus pollution, I'm sure. So this line that's coming from the top side going down was where the pencil sort of went through it and made a slice of some sort, a little drawing, interrupted the flow, the pattern. Again, at the bottom, there's this sort of slice going down. And this one came through that top area. And these ones I've also made into textiles. I've flipped them and rotated them. I'm not really quite sure what I'm doing with those yet. They're still sitting there. Just to give you an idea, all of these projects have happened in the last 3 years, so some of the ideas and some of the things going on are still percolating. And so, yeah, so they all exist on my website for now. And I'm quite happy with them sitting there right now. I'm quite happy with this sort of not being an object state that they live in, because I have a textile practice as well. There's something else going on in that where it's all about objects. It's about secondhand objects and things coming to me and being reused and changed. So this is a sort of a relief from that. And it seems to be a theme that's coming up a little bit. So having these dual things going on, like a digital and dyeing process, but that's something that I'm quite interested in how we're sort of dual thinkers all the time. And then I just wanted to, I guess, show you something that I'm working on the textile side. This past year, I spent a year in a ranger station on Harrison Lake, and I documented the shifting colors of the lake as spring went through. So as everything gets roiled up in turmoil, the colors change. Obviously, the storms come through, the colors change on the surface. And so each day I painted a silk panel in the color that I saw that day. Those I painted with a watercolor, and it went through and onto a board, and so there was a series of paintings that came out of it. And then also these silk panels that I've cut into a triangle. Triangles seem to come in and out of my life constantly. It's being around mountains all the time. And mounted them into a felt square. And then they were all sewn together and they were made into a site-specific window piece. I've taken that apart since, and I have now all these individual squares that are obviously out of place. They no longer live right next to the lake. It's no longer the colors reflecting back onto the lake. They now exist as sort of little window hangings. I will have them at the craft fair on Saturday. Shameless plug for myself. So each one has a different color. And then what I did with them while I was at the gallery was I took photographs of the lake through these. So it's the lake layered on top of the lake from different times. Took these photographs and I've been printing them as sticky wallpaper. So when you stick them on the wall, they're sort of like these little portals into a moment that I was seeing this other place. So I'm hoping that if anyone wants one and purchases one, that they will send me back a photograph of what they take through the silk, so that I can see their views through it instead of just my own. And that's sort of where my textile side is going, is this sort of weird combination of digital as well with material textiles, and sort of how do you get community involvement with the textile work. So yeah, that's me. Yeah, I tried a lot of different materials. That was part of being there. So I just collected anything that I could find that was about the right weight. So someone gave me this one that they use, and it was too heavy for the diagrams that I wanted. So it became, yeah, a choice. It's like, how can I make this material thing, but also make a drawing in the end? Like what material is also going to translate from the body to the paper. And that one was one of the best ones. Like that dashed line really gave it a graphic quality that I liked. So yeah, through experimentation, it was a conscious decision, yeah. I like diagrams a lot, like maps, pictures. Like I love the way that the hands are drawn on the string figures, like in people's books and things, like, yeah. So there are several types. There are games that can be played by two people. Cat's Cradle is obviously the most well-known around the world for some reason. And there are figures that are just shapes. And sometimes those shapes are created through several steps, and that there are several parts as a story, but they're done by an individual. What I found was that in different cultures, they have different meanings. So some places, only one person would be allowed to practice the string figures. It was a very spiritual practice. It was about sort of connecting in some way with a history and with a cosmological belief system. In other cultures, it was a game. It was meant as an event that people came to. You competed with each other to have the best ones, to give them names, sometimes to have the most simple ones. In other places, it was just, there was string around and you gave it to kids and they, gave them a few little things and showed them what to do. So everywhere that I've seen has a different relationship to them, and that's sort of what's really interesting as far as my interest in place goes, is this this ability for one thing, which almost seems like a human desire to play with the loop of string, can have so many different meanings and so many different relationships. And what happens then when you talk about it, like I've talked about this in several different places, and people have come up to me afterwards and had different stories to tell and different ways of bringing things to it, that changes my thinking about my own work too. And sometimes they're difficult, Sometimes you're dealing with colonial histories and how that has been taken and sort of documented in a book. And sometimes you're dealing with someone's like really sad memory from being a kid, and you're like, oh, wow, and they hadn't thought about it for 25 years or something. So it's interesting. It's how stories come out of those things, like how just playing with something that's so simple, there's nothing there, can spark all of these little things, all of these communities and all these connections and stories. I love it. Harry Smith? Yeah, interesting character. He collected folk music as well. And yeah, made weird videos. There's some really good interviews with him. They don't make much sense necessarily, but there was one thing, I don't think I said it. There's a quote he said in an interview. He said, every few years I get interested in string games, but I don't have the apparatus for doing it. And the interviewer sits there and he goes like, but don't you just need a loop of string? And he's like, no, you need the instructions. And that was just like, no. But the fact that there's this sort of desire to have instructions, that there has to be a limit, you know, and it has to be documented, and that means it's somehow authentic rather than it just being a play. Like, once you learn some basic movements, you can create any shape you want, and you can give it any title you want. How is that any less authentic than anything else? But I guess any time that you string a line between several points, you have a constellation of some sort, and so there's going to be that correlation in your head. They have been related to cosmological sort of mapping, and mapping of place, either through descriptions. So the canoe maker looking back at the hill, at the road from the hill, is this sort of description of a place, right? But also that, yeah, there are points, you're limited, you have 10 points that you can use, and quite often they only end up at 2, but they're points of reference that I'm sure in places have been used as accurate maps. But yeah, I think it's one of those things that just comes out from points and lines and a human connection to that as to how it relates to space and place, and to two-dimensionalizing something that's 3 dimensions, which is something I'm also really interested in. Like I was saying with my wearable works, it's like, how do you take a map that was a 3-dimensional representation of a place? You take that map, you cut it up, sew it back together, put it on your body so it becomes distorted by the shape of yourself, document that, and then put that same thing back up on a wall so it becomes a 2-dimensional object again, and like that flip back and forth between line and shape. Yeah, there are several of them from several different places that have stories that are connected to them, or that had stories and songs connected to them that are lost. And so there's an interesting back and forth between, like, was the shape supposed to help you remember the story, or was the story supposed to help you remember the shape? And like, how did that memory work? Or are they just totally harmonious with each other and one can't really exist without the other? Yeah, there's something quite beautiful about it, and sad. That there has to be a person-to-person relationship in order for these things to be fully experienced and fully evolved. But maybe we're disconnected from that. Like, when I was making the spine work, the director of the gallery was like, well, what about video? Because it has this, this ability to sort of connect. There's still bodies involved rather than it being a text. But I found the story around the fact that these things were in a textbook much more interesting than just the fact that I could learn it off the internet, right? That technology has allowed us that far, just didn't quite do it for me. But I've got the string. I know a couple.
But you had offered it. I wouldn't have like.
Yeah, no. It's funny, I hadn't done it for a year, and relearning it was so hard. It is a body memory. When I first started making them, my hands would ache after a few hours, like, because you're twisting your fingers in ways that you don't normally do. But the one I used for the book, so it starts out like that, and then you put your index fingers through, so it's a bit like the beginning for Cat's Cradle. And then you hook back, hook this one up, release the thumbs, hook right under and pull it back, release the little fingers. So there's a lot of like making and releasing. Like, it's sort of meditative. You twist this around and put your fingers in, and then you hook them back, and you hook this one back. So it's sort of like braiding, but and there, see that? And you get a net. And so that one, there are variations on it, and depending on how many knots are across, it has different names, and different places have done it in different ways and with different techniques. So sometimes it's called spider web. A different variation is called laughter in the house, which is an interesting one because they don't really know what the history of it was, whether there was some movement or whether it was to do with like gating your house so that creatures couldn't get in and laughing at them from the other side, which is one of the theories. And then there's a similar one as well that's just called the net. So there's multiples. And the canoe maker's a really easy one. So you just hook it back. You flip this through, flip it back into your thumb, and do this. And so that's the canoe, that's the road, and that's the hill. And so you can just flip back and forth, like a little game. Yeah, you should do it. I think everyone should do it and come up with all new ones that have new titles that have to do with the way we live now, and then we can just share them. That's right, yeah. I get funny looks all the time if I take this with me and I was sitting on the bank out here yesterday, and a guy in a car was sitting there and he was waiting for people to cross, and he's looking up at the hill, and I can just see the frown on his face, like, what is she doing? But yeah, I like that. I like to confuse people a little bit. It's like, why is that girl throwing a stick with a pencil and an elastic band into the river? If that makes you question your day, that's great. I don't need to make an object that made people wonder for a moment. That's more sometimes than what something in a gallery